So I'm playing some Miles Davis. I guess I got strike in Russia for copyright playing. What was that? Around midnight. I think it was Chet Baker's version. I'm guessing if he did one. That's all I remember playing was Chet Baker. And I don't know who's getting the royalties for his song because El Cayo uh, fuera la ventana muchos años en pasado. It was like 1988. So I don't know how he's getting some posthumous royalties with that song from way back then. I don't know, maybe it's like 75 years is how far you have to go back before. I don't know. This one is Miles Davis in 1959 was 75 years ago, wasn't it? No, it wasn't. So I don't know. I really don't. But sorry if you hear some banging in the background. I'm not happy about it. I got a headache. Probably somebody, is working with the landlords to work on a particular unit. So I'm getting benefited from it by my rent's going up and a bunch of noise from him hiring somebody. The more banging for the longer, the more my rent's going to go up and the more headache. But um, I'm trying to go breakneck speed through Samuel, chapter 1. So this is my third video, and I'm almost through it. I'll be done with Samuel by the end of this video. And I kind of just wanted to breeze by chapters 25 and 26. So I think he's already at this point got Saul's wife, but when Saul's on this death race with David, he's going to renege his daughter Micah, I think her name was, and betrothed her to, I can't remember the guy's name, Philly or something. We'll just call him Phil. And but David's going to, after he becomes king of Hebron or something, he's going to get his wife back after Saul dies. But at one point, he before, like, I think it was his armor bearer had told Phil, like, when they took his wife, like, hey, she's going back to David. He's like, no, that's not fair. And then Abner, I think it was just like, get lost. He's like, okay, getting lost. Maybe it was Joab. And he went off without incident. And he lived in peace after that without his wife. And he had taken in Carmel this guy Nabal, who, if you noticed, was Laban in an anagram, but who was Jacob's father-in-law, and they did have a big falling out, but not like as much of a falling out as like Ammon and Edom, because you got to remember, if they're trying to cut people's garments to expose, their shame, and then it's clear if they had how much circumcision they had, and you got to understand that probably these Idumeans, especially after David conquers them, and Ammonites, it's with good reason they're called my sons, because when you look at anytime they talk about Ammon, it says my sons. That's what it says for Ammon. And that's because you'll see in 2 Samuel chapter 9, the Syrians were working because David's campaigns were so far and wide. And that's why I'll come in uh, the days of Solomon, it's said that, Israel is as vast as the ocean, basically, because of all this conversion. David was not going to take any prisoners. And so they're going to do what David wants them to do uh, because they know that God's with him. And they're going to be part of his nation. So Ammon ends up becoming part of his nations, and all the elements that were allied against him from bitter rivalry in the campaigns, they left and they said, "We're not going to help Ammon." And Ammon's like, "But David, we're loyal to you," and so is Edom. Edom's like, "David, we're loyal to you," and so David's rival Nabal, who wasn't going to be polite to him, as his 600, troops were moving on the run, like they had nowhere to go from fleeing Saul and Israelites in general. They might have been strong in their camps around Gibeah, in the Samaritan hillside, but other than that, that's probably why people were living out in the desert. Partly is the hostile elements that have taken over. And let's not get it twisted. It wasn't just linguistic, because the face of the Philistines, they spoke linguistically Canaanitish languages. So, and this went as far and wide as to even later than this, with people like Hannibal Barca. And that was in Carthage. They had like Hannibal. I think Han in Hebrew is like good, maybe, and Baal is Lord. And Barca is like Baruch. It's the same letters, in the same language they used to write supposed Hebrew in, which is called Phoenician or Paleo Hebrew, which is a Canaanitish uh, script. And so, um, but these Philistines, thought of as like giants. This is how they thought of like the nation. So they thought of Goliath being an outsider, and the Philistines were really strong, and it probably leads back to a historical memory of the sea peoples and what remained from the big powers of the ships, which were powerhouses like Tyre and even as far as Carthage across. And and on the way, they might have stopped and met with like um, who knows, Albanians, or who knows, but I think they're called Illyrian people back then, maybe. But he had taken the wife of he's taken this Carmelites from Nabal, the fool, and his wife was already sympathetic to David, and that's why um, he looked back. It's like being retrospective, dwelling on the past. Like his wife's heart had already moved to David, and for this reason, he was looking back, kind of like they were living in lavish luxury in Sodom and Gomorrah, Lot's wife. So she's looking back at the city like, oh, I had a nice tent, it was going good. and she turns to stone. So like this, Nabal is looking back, um, thinking about the good old days when he had a beautiful wife. And Abigail, she left him, but the only verse in this whole thing I really want to focus on is 1 Samuel, verse 25. Uh, First Samuel chapter 25, verse 41. Rising and bowing to the ground. This is Abigail. Rising and bowing to the ground, Abigail answered, "Your handmaid would become a slave to wash the feet of my Lord's servants." Well, this is not something any rabbi but Jesus is going to do. He's going to um, be like the sinful woman who was anointing his feet. He's going to take on this low position. The servant is not greater than the master. Let's not get twisted. But this master, in his greatness, has such monogamy or whatever. No, what's it called? I can't remember. Magnanimous, I can't remember. Magnanimous or something. So here he is, running around with his mighty man, and he spared here. He goes to some cave or tent or whatever that Saul is posted up in, and he's there sleeping. He comes sleeping with his armor bearer not too far from his side. It's Abner, and these are David's nephews. David's nephews are Abbas, and he's also got the priest with him. So he's got his nephews, and he's got the priests who are some from Samuel. He's got that priest, and he's got the priests that are from Eli, and he's gonna with his nephews. Uh, whose grandpa is Yishi, Jesse, which means the man. So that's not really. It's more like a title. Like that's like saying he's the Minch. He's Gabor. He's like man, but not man like mankind. Adam is mankind. So Edom represents mankind. But it's unfortunate the way they view Edom as mankind. It's because they keep on punishing their brother. It's like, oh, I stole your inheritance, I got the good land, and you're stuck there basically over by Sodom and Gomorrah. And it's because like they believed that they chose wrong, that Lot had chose Sodom and Gomorrah, and then because of how they chose to live, fire and rain came down, so there's like no water in Petra. And but if you go to Petra, they have these elaborate cisterns and culverts to make use of the technology. But it's kind of like to blame them, and then when they get really powerful, what they do, they just extend dominance over their neighbor, son of Isaac, birthright stolen by deception, hated by his mother for no reason. And here they exert control over Edom, and therefore, like, it's so much easier. What I want to say really is it's so much easier to add than it is to subtract, and you can do both for sure. So who knows, before Ezra and different people revised these things, what it originally said, but you can easily add chapters or verses that say, "Oh yeah," and Mount Hor, the Mountain of Light, is the same as Mount Sinai, and I doubt it. Like there's going to be this idea of amount of cursing and amount of um, blessing, and there's going to be like 40 years in between, and the Deuteronomy seems to be second um, second law. So um, so you can add these verses that say this is that, but you can add a 13th tribe and be like, yeah, this was the son of. Oh yeah, so that's what I was saying about Reuben. So Reuben's going to have a curse put on him, and for that reason, he. But if you, when I was talking in the last video, if you overlay the maps, the land given to Reuben is the land of Edom, and that's because Reuben, according to the people like the apostle, he's had such a upbringing in these rules, and one of the rules from Torah is to like destroy Amalek, and so because Torah includes books like Numbers and things like that. That what they do, Numbers, they say, they were on this journey, and a lot of people got bit by the snake, and they had to avoid certain routes because of this people and that people, and they weren't allowed to cross here or there, and um, but it's like because Reuben, what did he do? He slept in his father's bed or whatever, and this is like Esau. So people like the apostle will say like Esau is, you know, his fault is he gives into his temptation. So he got so hungry. You'd be hungry too if you lived in the desert. Um, so like David will run into this Mizrahi kind of dude, this Egyptian, and he'll run into like this Amalekite dude, and like a lot of these dudes, um, they'll find like these guys were paid for by a price, and they were slaves, and their allegiance goes this way or that way, and but just as Edom, sold his birthright for a morsel of soup, David, not David, but Paul has a certain disdain for Esau, and that's based on his upbringing, because you can insert these things like they lost the test of temptation, and this is where a Judahite will say, "Oh, we're better than you." Like this is why people like Muhammad, the prophet, or um, you know Jesus will go out into the wilderness, because this wilderness represents like the um, the nitty gritty, like digging deep, having to find out who you really are, have nothing except the sun, and the, to be able to survive that means like one is really resourceful, and um, you know, so to find water in these places, their communities built civilizations, and they would even want the other nations to think of them as being really industrious to um, undertake these big well digging. So you have people like Abraham who went down to these, and Isaac went down to these places by themselves and dug these deep wells, and 7 of them, which means like the full all of them, and therefore they have this water, and this water is like Mary, the mother of Jesus, and the Holy Spirit, who is kind of what Moses and his sister represent, and this rock in the wilderness that water comes out of is Christ, and Moses like struck the rock, so he didn't get to see the promise, but his sister, was jealous, but she was a prophetess, and her name like means water, and it's very closely related to the word Lord. So she's held on like a high place, even though she had sinned. Like Moses sinned, everybody sinned technically. David sinned technically. Lord knows Jacob did in his younger days, That's not the Muslim perspective though. The Muslim perspective is more so like the Old Testament, where someone's righteous like the way Job is. Did they do everything they're supposed to do? That's a righteous person. And I wanted to only take one verse out of 26. It says, "As the Lord lives," David continued, "it must be the Lord himself who will strike him, whether the time comes for him to die or he goes out to perishes of battle." So it's kind of like we were reading in Chronicles a few videos back, where there was these battles, and there's the um, who was Jezebel's husband, Ahab. So that little trickster, and then he tried to pose as the king of Judah, and here he goes, and he gets wiped out by one lone arrow. Totally improbable, and um, you're yeah, it happened, but they're also, it's the Lord, because of the favoring of Judah, because these were rival kingdoms for the next couple books. There's no Israel and Judah just being Israel, um, except for Second Samuel and the beginning of First Kings. But by First Kings 13 and all the way to Second Kings and through Chronicles, there's of course Chronicles goes before Kings in time and after, but um, not really after. Yeah, after too. But I mean, like I said last time, the Bible I read from is a little bit different. There's more historical books in there, so there's like a long period of time in the missing years, the 400 blank years in the Protestant Bible, and but here we are in the 11th century, and in the 11th century, Saul, here he do here he's really mad now, but here Dave, when he notices David spared his life, he's saying like, "Hey, you're Yahweh's Messiah, dude. I'm not gonna hurt you." And he's like, "Bet," because you could have really got me this time, like last time too. Um, but and he's like, you could die by an arrow randomly. You could die from old age, but either way, Yahweh's gonna kill you one day, and at that point, I'll be king. And so Saul's like, Baraka, thank you, so much. I am so indebted to you. Uh, I'm going to well wish the mess out of you right now. But David said to himself, I shall perish someday at the hand of Saul. I have no choice but to escape to the land of the Philistines, and Saul will give up his continual search for me throughout the land of Israel, and I shall and this isn't really like the land of Israel. This is like David is the kind of dude who could live in Israel, but when there's a ban on him throughout Israel, and that's just a small area of Samaria right now, and he's going to end up going to the other side of the river and winning some stuff. But right now, there's this little area of West Jordan, kind of called the maybe Samaria or the West Bank, you know, and he's going to say not, and this is just where they have powerful presence. It doesn't mean what it means today, where everybody is a citizen and they pay this amount perfect taxes based on calculations and everything's reported and this and that. It's like more like the cartoon by Disney Robin Hood, where whoever the leader is has a tax man. This tax man is going to kind of investigate. He's going to be usually viewed very negatively. Um, Especially when you have a Jerusalem system or a temple system, it's like more voluntary. People wanted to give to the priests who were like the kings, and that is how they collected their, you know, that's how they buttered their bread or whatever. And here he goes. He lives with Hashish again. So he had lived with Hashish a few chapters back, and Hashish said, "Hashish, you guys are pretty cool, but my guys don't trust you, so you got to leave." You know, and I'm not going to think if the Philistines controlled most of the land of Judah and Amalekites control a lot of the land of Judah. I'm not going to believe that David's collecting all these tolls from these people, and I think it's like they're just rolling pretty thick. So Judah right now is hiding, probably even passing themselves off, like kind of being crypto Judah, like, hey, Amalek, we're just one of you guys, or same with the Philistines, you know, but um, doing whatever kind of their own practices, in the dark. Then it's like, well, here's David and his mighty men. That's what Judah would be at this point when it says like Saul and David collaborated on attacks against the Philistines. It will say the armies of Israel and the armies of Judah. So the armies of Judah is like David's like posse. That's like hundreds of dudes that are sometimes they can conscript, like they can go like kind of like Mao Zedong. He was in China and he walks like all the way around and he's collecting different people and rallying for his mission and um, showing what he can offer. And I don't know what kind of food stuffs they had. They probably walked with some sheep or something, but they might have been taking what they can get. It's like, hey, we just beat the snot out of this town, so we'll just take what they have here. You know, and he was kind of like a Robin Hood. It's like when he take it, he distribute to all the people of the land of Judah. All these guys like living in tents. Whenever somebody powerful tells them to move on, hopefully they don't take their stuff, and they try to act like they don't have much. And you know, here he's going to give out different parts for these poor folk. Of the booty things he took. Joshua did the same thing for the pre-Deuteronomic. Before the second temple, before David, before all of this. This is when the priests would rule, and sometimes it's likely that Judges is a Yahwehistic book that came much later. So there may have been warlords, but that seems to more be the way that we're coming into the story of David. That not only was there somebody like Joshua There's also a Caleb. There's also a uh, person like Zerubbabel, who's, you know, the governor, the warlord, the host of the armies, and this would be the king. So this would be the Messiah. So when David says to Saul in the story, we're talking about how Israel was first. This is a real kingdom that happened. They spoke Canaanitish, and but then after the exile, you have this second law where you have this idea that no, we're not going to be safe in these walls, but we're going to be risen again, and there's big promise for us. So it might look like we're being defeated, but we're going to have the victory one day. And this really culminated in 2nd century BC. So most of what we know about the Bible comes from 2nd century BC, as far as the Old Testament. And in this story of Saul, the king is the one who had his shield anointed by Samuel. So Samuel was chosen, adopted. God chose him. Eli chose him. He was adopted through a miraculous birth and strict Nazarite rules, given this high status. And he went and anointed Saul's shield with oil, giving him the show that he's God's anointed. And so God didn't want them to have a king, but when he repented of his obstinance and said, okay, it's kind of like one of those monkey paws or bedazzled situations where you be careful what you wish for. There is a lot of problems that come with this, to be like all the other nations. And so here you have David saying, like Cyrus the Great, uh, Ezra the priest is going to say, yeah, Cyrus the Great was the Messiah. There was a king. You know, but he said that we get to have this and we get to have that, and he wrote a bill for it, and he stamped with his seal. So therefore, we can build this and we can have that, and I better get off here. Other Mike's about to go live. Um, he he'll probably do some announcements first. I probably got a little bit of time. Um, let's just say Pastor Mike. He's got his own church. Uh, so so he's living up in with the Philistines. This is chapter 27, and he's got two wives, Abigail and Ahinoam from Jezreel. And I think Jezreel is where like Judah got his wife, and um, or maybe it's Carmel where Jezebel's from, but Jezreel is similar to the word Israel, and um, Yeshurun, but where did I see that? I saw a word that I was like, oh, here these professionals are saying that the Zadi letter is the same as the Shen letter. So he's got the widow of Nabal, and I don't know. I guess like one of David's sons, Jonathan, his firstborn. David was his best friend, but he had a daughter, or he had a son, it went lame, maybe running from David, and he didn't even know this dude existed, until the guy had like grown up and everything, and supposedly his best friend, and then so he's got a wife who's got the same name as Sal's wife, and um, he's just been El Ganador. He's been the winner of every single dispute between these two. Um, but here he go. Uh, like he winds up going to Macau, and he gets this bride from Macau, who's probably like the king's daughter, and that's to show how powerful David was. So it's like when he goes to these places, he had a victory because he married the king's daughter. So he went up to Carmel, stole that guy's wife. He went to Jezreel, maybe got so he's got Saul's daughter. He's just really um, winning. He's definitely getting warmed up after long days out. And uh, but this is supposed to be a low point for him, where after a bunch of victories, he's only got him two little wives, poor guy, and he's running. That same day, Achish gave him Ziklag, which has therefore belonged to Pobrecito. Pobrecito Ziklag. So Hashish gave him Ziklag. That's where he posted up his first little kingdom. He when he was coming up, there was a little desert city, kind of like in the land of the Philistines, kind of like in the land of Judah. There was no really border between the two. It's pretty much the land of Mizraim too. I mean, we saw that um, the Ishmaelites lived all along the way, and when these guys would act up, where'd they go? They'd flee to Araba, and they'd meet up on the road to Araba, and they would go down, and um, we just stay off the main road if you don't want to be seen. So that same day, Achish gave him Ziklag, which has therefore belonged to the kings of Judah up to this present time. When that talking about after 48, um, in in all, David lived a year and 4 months in the country of the Philistines. David, so he lived in the country of the Philistines, but it's belonged to Judah this whole time. If these guys are mortal enemies for time immemorial, good luck. Good luck policing that. There is a like on their side of the green line. They'll say, "Oh, yeah, this is Ziklag right here, definitely," but they don't know. They'll call anything anything. It's good for tourist bucks and Aliyah and all that to name it and claim it. So they'll say, "Oh yeah, this is Ziklag." Um, it's whatever. I mean, the Europeans were doing this for a long time. This is essentially what the Crusaders did. They went over there and be like, "Oh yeah, this is the tomb of David, and this is." And after that, the Muslims were doing the same thing. They're like, "Yep, this is where Samuel was. This is where Abraham was buried. This is where he buried his wife." And you know, we studied it. We took scientific samples. They were doing that 1,000 years ago, taking scientific samples and figuring it all out. And good luck. I don't even know where the upper room was. They'll say she was in the city. I guess being a daughter of David, you'd have a pretty nice spot up in the city. Um, So David and his men went up and made raids on the Gershites, Gerzites. I gotta look those up. What the heck is a Gershurite or Gerzite? Gerzite? I swear. Um, and the Amalekites. I'm guessing these are all Hebrews. So he would people living in the land between Telam and approaching Shur in the land of Egypt. So this, Edomites, Ishmaelites, Mizrahi, um, in attacking the land, David would not leave a man or woman alive. Would carry off sheep, oxen, asses, and camels or clothes. I thought I thought Saul got in trouble for taking some sheep. He was supposed to just do a total ban, even on everything. On his return, he brought these to Ashish, king. I think it was king of Gath, one of the five Philistine cities, who asked David, answered the Negeb of Judah, the Negeb of Jaramil. I don't know. I think that has something to do with water, or the Negeb of the Kenites. Kenites is that's where Caleb's from. Caleb meaning dog. Like they keep on saying that, like that means something in this language. They talk about dogs all the time. There's even a guy named Dog. They're always talking about dogs when they want to talk about being an unclean foreigner. It's all over this book. But David would not leave a man or woman alive, would betray him by saying, "This is what David did." And remember, that's what happened with Elisha helped a widow who was a foreigner, and then when Jesus went up to help a foreign widow, all his apostles, like, they wanted to call down rain on the Samaritans. They were like, this is just a dog, right? This woman's just a dog, right? And it still exists in other Semitic languages. Like, I think, like in Egypt, if a politician, thinks this one politician's from a terrorist group, he'll just call him a dog or something. But the word is probably a little more tricky because it's closely related to the word for heart. They're very similar words. And only a letter difference from the word for book. But here we go. While they're warming up in church, let me get a few more things in. Let me get through this book real quick. But David would not leave a man or woman alive. He brought to Gath, fearing that they would betray him, by saying, "This is what David did." So the Philistines have David as one of their agents, and he's taking all these lands with his mighty men, but they're not too happy. It's like they will kind of, you know, they're going to trust David and his mighty men, but they're not going to trust these. I wonder if the Get Up Kids will give me a strike. I accidentally clicked it. Yeah. Oh, the next one will. Let me change it right now. What's an old one? I don't know. Hopefully, no one's getting money off him except maybe his kids. Did he have kids? I don't think he did. We just play the same one over again. He probably did. What do I know? I recently found out he lived in Detroit in 1959. Um, So he says, he must certainly be detested by his people. I shall have him as my vassal forever. So this Philistine king's like, dude, I never asked you to go knock out all your brothers' lands. You know, your brothers, the Amalekites and the Edomites and all these different Hebrew groups. You know, I never asked you to go and do that. Um, like now they're really gonna hate you. All the different Hebrew groups, they're never gonna want you to be king over them because you just like went there and like killed all the men, women, so everybody had to run. We're hurried out into the desert again, and now they're never gonna want you to rule over them. They think you're a total tyrant. We're trying to like ease our way in and rule over them because we have better ways. You know, our agricultural implements are better, our military implements are better. You know, or maybe they're not, but for some reason the Trojans don't exist anymore, and there might have been this trick play where they brought in this Trojan horse, and the rest is history. But the Greeks continued to think like their main god Dionysus for many groups, and um, Penelope and all these. This has to do with prosperity, Persephone. These have to do with um, Lakshmi, the god of Hinduism. That's one of wealth, and so this wealth comes from a history of an Asiatic existence where if they were going to plant, they'd plant these wheat fields for their horses, and these horses would help them in their military victories and their travels, and help them plow their fields and stuff like this. And this became part of their culture, as well as other parts of their culture for the sun and the pig and other things like that. Um, Part of the Roman identity. And so in those days, the Philistines mustered out military forces to fight against Israel. So Achish said to David, "You realize, of course, that you and your men must go out on a campaign with me to Jezreel." And David answered Achish, and good, now that you will learn. So Jezebel, king of Ahab, king of Israel, Saul, king of Israel, different time, of course, but I think we should think of it in a similar way, that Israel is the bad kingdom, and here this Philistine Judahite alliance is the only thing that's stopping him. Uh, and of course, God's on the side of David, so the Philistines aren't being attacked by David; they're being helped by David, and Israel is the enemy. But even though somebody came along, and when they're writing this study Bible, they call raids on Israel foes. So because he attacked the Amalekites, they're throwing their own understanding from having read Torah and stuff like that. So the Amalekites are the bad guys. So and Judah is part of Israel. But is Judah part of Israel? It's much easier to write in a 13th tribe than it is to um, really spell out the nuances when you want those nuances to exist. So they didn't want these nuances to exist. They wanted you to conflate these. These are two of the same thing. But I'm asking, if the hated son, Esau, is the son of the promise because he's the son of Isaac, then it really goes to show how, if Leah is the hated wife and Ephraim gets the blessing, and that's where we find Joshua from the tribe of Ephraim, then where is Ephraim special blessing? Where's Ephraim's special blessing in this part? Where is Ephraim's special blessing in Ezra? When it's just the priest and the governor. Where is the original Joshua, the Israelite Joshua, um, whose name is Jesus? So they can name the priest Jesus, as they did in the book of Zechariah and the book of Ezra and Nehemiah, but that doesn't make him an Ephraimite. They can say that David is an Ephrathite, but there's still something missing, And they're trying, and they don't protest too much. That's why they're doing these plays on words, and making the names the same to get over um, this argument. They're hiding the argument, glossing over it. And that's because the second law is after the desert experience. And this is why Jesus' ministry is set up that way, that in the beginning he goes out and has his trial in the wilderness. Because Jesus represents all Judah, he represents all Israel, he represents all the nations. That's what the cross is. It's the conflagration of all time and space at one point. And things go on after and things go on before, but this is when things switch. And this is why Saul is another Saul, Sheol, the grave. So yeah, Israel went down to the grave. So the second post-exilic Judahite religion can expropriate the name. And they do that today. They'll say, we call our nation Israel. But really, it's not. It has nothing to do with Ephraim whatsoever. It has nothing to do with Samaria. But they take the name. And Samaria is where Israel was, and all these books are just going to talk about these two different places, Judah and Samaria, and how they're against each other. And you'll say, oh, well, there was the Benjaminites, and they're part of the Judahites. Well, no, Samuel is a Benjaminite. He's already a son of Rachel, and he's the king of Israel. And David is here living with the Philistines. And this is the second time. And Samuel died here, so I guess I'm not going to call any more videos Adopted Sammy, because Sammy has grown old early in this book and he's died by now. So there's nothing left except later in this chapter that he's going to have this seance. Saul's going to have this seance. And in the seance, he's going to have called the spirit of Samuel back from the dead, because he was so worried about David. And in his head, it was like he didn't see Judah as Israel. He saw Judah as Philistine. And so he's so worried about Philistines, namely David. And Israel is in his grasp, but he's going to lose it. People in his kingdom are already kind of liking David. And he's already been anointed by Samuel. And Saul knows that the Lord's with them, mostly because he knows that David's a pretty good dude to him. He's never harmed him in any kind of way. Well, he could have. maybe even should have. Now Samuel had died, and after mourning by all Israel was buried in the city of Ramah. Meanwhile, Saul has driven out mediums and fortune tellers in the land. The Philistine levies advanced to Shinnom and encamped. Saul too mustered all Israel, and they camped in Gilboa. When Saul saw the camp of the Philistines, he was dismayed. So he's looking at the Philistine camp and calls the witch. It's against the Torah. It's a big no-no. And now the Philistines then camped at the spring of Herod. Herod. At the spring of Herod near Jezreel. As the Philistine lords were marching, groups 100,000, David and his men were marching in the rear guard with the chief. So he's like, these guys are Hebrews. He's like, no, he's cool. He's with me. No, I'm not marching with these guys. They could turn on you. But this is something they said about David a lot, because he'd say one thing and do another in a way. He was good talking. He'd say, "Yeah, Ashish, I'm your servant. You're my king. I would never do anything to you." But he's saying the same thing to his so-called Lord, the Anointed. Um, his Lord was Saul, the Anointed. So while he's telling Ashish this, when he sneaks up in the quiet, dark Israelite camp, he's going to whisper things to Saul, quite the contrary. And these people are wise to that. They're like, no, it's for the second time this has happened. We're going into battle. You say David's coming. He's got these crazy zealots all up and down with him, and they've been winning some battles. Not coming with us, and that was that. So David um, had to go back to his camp, and while he was gone the whole time, uh, the camp got sacked by the Amalekites. And who can blame him? I mean, he had just put everyone there to the sword, so and they had to flee. So he's going to leave his camp open while he goes off trying to attack Israel. Of course, they're going to ruin the camp, and so they got his wife, and who knows what they did with him, with them. But he got him back. Uh, David continued the pursuit for 400 men. Um, and he ran up on them until they were exhausted, and there was an Egyptian found, and they gave him food, and he said, I'm a slave in Amalekite. So he's like, David ends up like, when he gets like the head of Saul or somebody, no, I think it was Saul's son. When he gets the head of Saul's son or something like that, it comes from an Amalekite slave, and I think he got smited. But this dude is a slave in Amalekite, so he might be okay. Because I fell sick 3 days. I fell sick for 3 days ago. Can you believe it? 3 days ago. Of all number, we raided the Negev of the Cherethites in the territory of Judah and of the Negev of Caleb. The Negev of Caleb. So there's the territory of Judah and the Negev of Caleb. David just said the same thing. So David agrees. He said the land, the Negev of Judah, the Negev of the Kenizzites. But I guess this Egyptian Amalekite knows about Caleb more than David does, because he actually refers to it by the great Caleb. Or maybe David likes Caleb a lot more, so he's not going to call him Adah. Maybe he's got some honorary name or something. I have no idea. You will not kill me. You won't send me back to my master. He led them to where the Amalekites scattered. And here they are, like Alexander the Great. They messed up. Here they are, living it up. like Sisera, eating, drinking. This is the same thing with like Muhammad. So it's like what what Mordecai's thinking. Mordecai's like, oh, if I put my cousin, into his bed, she'll drive a tent peg through his head in the middle of the night. She didn't need to because he switched ways. So the tide was turning against the temple in Jerusalem. So Saul represents the Apostle Paul, where he, instead of going against the Lord's anointed, he changes and follows him. So that's where Saul went wrong and the apostle went right, because the fates were changing against the zealots. The zealots they might have had their day in the sun, but if the Israel can be replaced by the zealots, then the zealots can be replaced by the church, because they are the true continuation of what God was leading them to do. And so they asked St. Paul at his conversion, who are you to go against the Lord's anointed? And how hard is it, Paul, for you to kick against the pricks? So if you were going to be God's good sheep, you're going to follow his anointed. But you're going to be a bad sheep, you're going to go against his anointed. And so his body was the church members, the apostles. And so they were turning them all over to councils and putting them to death because they had laws. So Jesus told them, do whatever their law tells you. And they did. They were perfect as they could be. Jesus, perfectly perfect, and still put to death under the law. And even though Moses lived a good life, he didn't have a full life because it was limited by his own sin. And David, even though God favored him and he got everything he could ever want, it ended up becoming a bad thing, and he ended up having to go on the run again, even after being the beloved king who could call down fire from heaven and could march down the street contrary to the rules. And um, so David, when he got the spoils after attacking all these cities of the Amalekites, he gave them to all over the Negev. So these lands of Caleb and stuff, Hebron and all that, he sent those to all those little outposts and wells where people lived and dwelt. He would send the spoils because the Amalekites, were probably big bullies at this point. The Judah apparently was supposed to be thought of as really weak and very small and dispersed. And so here he's going back to all these people, and now Judah's going to be really on his side. So he's got Judah real secure after defeating the bullies, and they don't seem to have any problem with, weren't you just living with the Philistines? They understand the guy was going through some things. Mainly he was being attacked by Saul. That was one of his biggest problems in his whole life, was the persecution from Israel. So when David says, "Oh, the nations are all around me, encompass me," David pretty much controlled the nations around him. What he didn't control was Israel, and the king of Israel represents Abraham, who came from the Gentiles but was adopted. So that's how David is. He was adopted. He was chosen by God, and there was a big ritual for this to happen. And so he fell on his own sword. Saul fell on his own sword, and that's very symbolic. David didn't do it, and so did Joshua. I don't know if that's because of the honey, but it's probably because he followed his dad into battle. They looted and And then they sent his head back to Ziklag, where David's kingdom was, the city of Ziklag. And he answers soldiers. So here this kid comes up to him and is like, "Yeah, I was in this battle, and I was on his side." And so somehow an Amalekite immigrant is an Israelite because he immigrated. So like it says in Torah, you can have immigrants, but it also says you can't be Amalekite. So he's probably a crypto Amalekite. And but here he to the king at such a crucial time, he's gonna totally confess to his secret identity and drop his alias, and he's gonna say, "Yep, I'm an Amalekite, and I'm happy to say the king of the Israel's dead, and you're gonna be the king, David, because I don't like the Amalekites because they lose, and I'm gonna be on the side of the Judahites." David said, "Are you serious, bro? You done? How dare you dispatch the Lord? Tell me that the Messiah is dead." And so he says this prayerful lament, and this is like almost God saying this because it's in this kind of um, pentameter or something. Like it's in this really um, prophetic language, like people like Isaiah speaking and the prophets. So it's supposed to mean something when it's written like that. This is what God's saying because He's saying it. It's like an incantation, and so it's written in the book of Jasher, they say, and taught to the Judahites. So it's supposed to, like there's even the prophecy against Amalekites. I mean, a lot of it comes in this kind of poetic rendering, as that's how you know it's the Lord saying. When the prophet has an incantation, the spirit's supposed to like seize him, and he's supposed to speak very eloquently, and therefore it's a divine speech of a very learned person instead of a humdrum of people's chitter chatter, and so God thinks people are mumblers, so they just gibberish. It's kind of a Greek thing, like, oh, it's written in this very poetic language, so therefore this is one of the gods speaking as an oracle. But people spoke in just prose. And I'm gonna get up off here. What else do I want to say? I'm in second Samuel now, and now Abner, son of Ner, and the servants of Ishbal, Saul's son, and Mahanaim for Gibeon, Joab, son of Zuriel, and David's servants also set up and met them at the pool of Gibeon, and they sat down one side of the pool and the other. So they just like grab each other's helmets. 12, you pick your 12 guys, we'll pick our 12 guys, and we will all stab each other at the same time. There's where no one can say you attacked me and I attacked you. We both attacked each other, and we'll see who's tougher because 24 of us are going to literally get stabbed in our stomach, and that's going to incite everybody around us to just start stabbing each other because this is on. We hate each other that much. You say you're going to be king. I say I'm going to be king. I have the right. You have the right. David's thinking, I know I was anointed to be king, and I waited my turn. And this other guy's like, I'm literally the king's son. I'm literally the prince, and it's on. And there's like a civil war But really, it's not even that. It's like, when were they ever the same nation? You know, they were, the Judahites were on the land, and the Israelites were running it. And there's a lot of bad blood. Yes, there was a time where David's forces did join the Israelite forces. There were a couple battles again back there, but not numerously more than David trying to join these other battles. I guess those battles might not have happened where David would be given a good place to live by them. He would ally with them. He'd attack their same enemies, but he was too much of a renegade, to ever be considered part of their army. So when it really push came to shove, they wouldn't really fight side by side. Where Israel's going through these battles without Judah, but Judah would have been on their side had Israel not been had this jealousy. So it says here in Isaiah 11:13 that one day in the kingdom, when the kingdom is reformed, there's going to be no hatred or jealousy for one another, because there was a lot of envy coming from Israel, according to Deuteronomist, from being not chosen, and from the southern kingdom, from being chosen, they had a certain hatred for um, the Gentiles, so who are the northern kingdom. So it's saying in Isaiah 11:13, the day is going to come where this where you can't this hatred, you can't even eat in their house, you can't even let them around you, they can't come over. This is going to end one day, and that's going to be in the Messianic era. And so similarly, this jealousy where it's like, oh, I have sour grapes, I wasn't chosen. It's like, you can get over all that. You were invited to come work in the vineyard at the 11th hour, just in time. You get your coin, you're good. And a lot of people are mad about that. They're like, oh, I've been in this vineyard, umpteen hours, and I'm gonna get my coin. And it's like, wait, you yesterday, it's like this. Okay, I'm gonna tell you. This is what Sad Guru says. I'm gonna tell you. Um, I'll give you $1 billion. This guy wants $1 billion. That's my goal. I'm gonna be a billionaire. And he says, okay, I'm gonna give you $1 billion. And then he said, and invite 10 of your friends, and they'll help you. And then he goes, okay. So the 11 of them show up for this project, and he's like, okay, here's your $1 billion, and each of your friends, I'm giving them 10 billion each. And all of a sudden the guy's mad. Why do they get 10 billion and I get 1 billion? This is all my idea. And this is kind of Paul's hang-up. The apostle, when he was Sheol, when he was the grave, he wanted all of his strict upbringing, everything he studied, and all the times he prayed, and all the times, and that's to show that he didn't enjoy not getting to eat those things. He didn't enjoy serving God. It was like a working out in the sun, in a vineyard, picking grapes and all this. He begrudged the work he did for the Lord's vineyard. And so he wanted to get paid more, that I should get the highest rank. And he never stopped this, even when the Messianic age was being preached out to all the nations by all these different groups as Jerusalem fell apart. He still didn't believe anybody else's gospel. Nobody else could teach the good news because he didn't think of their news as good news. Kind of like David at this point, when they're coming to him and saying, David, good news, the king is dead. He is mad. He's saying, good news? What the? I never said that was good news. That's terrible news. And so, good news to these other groups isn't really the gospel. It isn't the good news. It's Paul's good news. And Paul's good news is about this Jewish person that gave up everything to bring usher in this new era and reach this pinnacle of absolute righteousness. And he was betrayed by those around him and the high priest, and they put him to death in the law, and the nations raged because they conspired with the Sanhedrin to destroy the anointed one. But the anointed one can't be destroyed because it's God's plan. So even though you can't see it, he's working in all these different people to destroy the enemies, and the enemies are going to be destroyed. So it's a modus potens operation where when you read this, you're supposed to look at these prophecies against Jerusalem and realize that that's who were the apostles' enemies, because they're the ones that hated the body of Christ, and they hated him for no reason. It wasn't the Gentiles that hated the Messiah. Pilate washed his hands. It was the high priest that said he was a blasphemer. It's not illegal in Greek culture to blaspheme. They do it all the time. They draw, like guys like Alexander the Great. He said, "Oh, my mother was Hera, like Heracles, and my father was Achilles, and therefore I got this immortal soul." And this is kind of like Jesus. Jesus is saying, "Oh, my parentage is from the gods," and now they have these icons of Jesus in a culture where it's strictly no icons. And then you can't drink um, sangrine, you can't drink sangria, you can't drink wine or blood. They have to pour it out. And it even talks of even Samuel about these rules in their camps of pouring out the blood. And here Jesus said, not only are you going to eat my flesh, totally illegal, you can't eat human flesh, you're going to drink my blood. You can't even drink blood in general, let alone human blood. Get out of town. So it's like this total breaking of the law. So therefore, if the law put to death an innocent person, when we do away with it, it's a new covenant, and we're breaking law openly. We know that it's over. And to boot, we also know that God is going to be responsible. Remember, it said, we just read, I think it was 1 Samuel 25 or 26, where God's going to, I think it was 26:10, God's going to be responsible for the death of Saul. So Israel did see out its days. The Syrians did take over. And when the prophets talk about what happened to the Syrians, it's their own fault. It's their fault for why. And when the Babylonians took over the southern kingdom, it's their own fault, because they were supposed to remember God. And what they do, they follow the ways of the nations on their own. All right. I better get off of here. All right. Peace.